Man, I'm digging this music. Just love this chill vibe. Again, that music for the intro comes from Pretzel.rocks. It's kind of a nice little royalty-free streaming, which is pretty cool. That's really to help us out that do want to do streaming and don't want to pay a bunch of money for, music. Because sometimes we want to just kind of have some nice chill music going on. So, how's everybody doing today? As most of you guys know, I did separate this channel away from my Programming Made Easy channel, and really that was kind of a twofold reason. The first was to kind of separate this content from that content and make that channel much more about the tutorials, right? And just a quick heads up on that, just so that some of you guys, I do have a lot of crossover viewers for that. The reason, there's a series that I've been doing over there on web development, and it's been a bit delayed. There's been like about a week that I've had off. It's because unfortunately my job has really been very, very busy lately, and I haven't really had much time to focus on the stuff that I post up on YouTube, because my regular job, it does take precedence. I gotta earn a living. So unfortunately that has kind of led to a little bit of a downfall in some of the content that I produce over there. But I do plan on getting back on it this week. I should produce a couple more videos at least this week. So be looking out for those. They will be coming, and I apologize for having the delay on those. I do have kind of these goals for myself about what I want to do with that channel and how often I want to post videos. And I'm trying to do that, but again, work kind of gets in the way. So thank you so much for joining me on this channel, the Coffee with Steve channel. The second reason why I decided to make this channel was because I wanted to split the content over to this new channel so that I could talk about whatever the heck I wanted to on this channel, and it wasn't necessarily tied just to programming. I know a lot of you guys come over to this channel and came over here because this is where I do talk about technology quite a bit. It's kind of my area. It's where my specialty is. It's what I know a lot about. But I also am I like pop culture stuff, right? I like entertainment. I like, I do discuss politics, obviously, as you guys know. I'll discuss anything. I really, really will. And I plan on having this channel be very open and talking about all sorts of different topics. So, in that vein, this is probably going to be the first video I think I'm doing on this particular topic, which is entertainment. So, there is a television show that is out on Fox right now that I'm sure some of you have probably heard of. I imagine a lot of you, when you first initially heard of this, you were like, I don't know if that's really going to be worthwhile. Maybe even scoped it out a time or two. But I got to tell you, it's really become one of my favorites, and especially on TV right now. I do watch like Game of Thrones. I've thought about doing some Game of Thrones videos, but I realized, I'm so far late to that game that it's probably not worth me doing it. Maybe I'll do like a wrap-up video on my overall thoughts of the series in general at some other point once it does wrap up. But no, what I'm going to talk about today is, drumroll please, I gotta switch screens, the Orville. Yes, the Orville. This TV show developed by Seth MacFarlane for Fox. And, the initial vibe that I think everybody got from the beginning trailers of Orville a few years ago, I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 years ago when they first announced it and they kind of put together a trailer for it. I think most people had this vibe about it, that it was going to be just a joke, right? I mean, this is Seth MacFarlane. He, Family Guy, American Dad, and what's that one? And then behind the Ted movies, right? So nothing but jokes and jokes and jokes. And I think for a large portion of people, it was like, well, so he's just going to make fun of Star Trek is what we all just kind of assumed with this. And so some of us, I like Seth MacFarlane. I really like some of the shows. I like watching Family Guy. I like American Dad. I found Ted, the first Ted was pretty good. The second one, not so much. But it was still okay. I mean, I like Mark Wahlberg, so I'll watch just about anything with him in it. Marky Mark, right? Remember those days? So, sorry, just need to make sure my microphone volume was right. Okay. So, the Orville. Now, here's what's funny about this. The very first season, the critics gave it a 31%. 31%. Now, you may think, well, okay, so how in the world did they get a season 2 if they were that bad? And were they really just like fart jokes and, Family Guy, but like Star Trek Family Guy? Well, not really. Not at all. In fact, I think most of the fans were incredibly surprised at how good the show turned out to be. In fact, the audience score was a 94% for the first season. And this is where there's kind of this disconnect between, I think, the Hollywood glamour press versus, the everyday average Joe that likes to watch TV. Right? There's kind of this bubble surrounding entertainment or surrounding TV and movies. And these critic scores, I think, were more or less because they didn't get it. They didn't understand what Seth MacFarlane was going for. But Seth really kind of knew how to tap into this need of diehard Star Trek fans that wanted kind of that old Star Trek feel back. Right? That's really kind of what we wanted. But we also wanted something fresh and new. We didn't just want, Star Trek Enterprise, part 2. We didn't want, because the Enterprise was a fairly decent show. I think it got panned a lot more than it should have. I think it did a pretty decent job of trying to stay with it but be different. I think it veered a little too far from the original feeling of Star Trek Next Generation. And I think most Star Trek fans view Next Generation as kind of the pinnacle of the whole sci-fi genre. In fact, I mean, there's some people that would say like, Stargate was great. Firefly was obviously one that a lot of people love. And then there's Battlestar Galactica. Like there's a bunch of different TV shows that were great sci-fi, but when you think about sci-fi, when you think about the best television show ever produced about sci-fi, most people will probably gear themselves towards saying Star Trek Next Generation. And so that's kind of where it's home base, right? It's what we compare everything else to. And here we have the Orville coming along, and expectations were all over the place on this show. So how does an audience score go to 94%, right? So clearly Hollywood doesn't get what everybody else is getting. And the reviews on the original Star Trek, don't forget, like the Captain Kirk days, that was really, really bad too, right? Most people didn't get it. And Gene Roddenberry expressed that was going to be a spaghetti western, but set in the stars, right? That was kind of Gene Roddenberry's vision, is we're going to do spaghetti western on TV, like a Will Rogers, but we're going to do it in space. So, anyway, I'm saying a lot. So the audience score was 94%. The critics' review was 31%. What the heck was the difference? Well, I'll tell you what the difference was. Seth MacFarlane captured that original feeling of Star Trek. And I love the slogan here because I think it really wraps up what exactly was different. So it's 400 years in the future, technology has changed. And so the technology, it's not even Star Trek technology. They've got different vocabulary that's being used on all of this stuff. But the way that they're very careful in the way that they craft the engineering so that it kind of has that Star Trek feel, and that the issues that they deal with are done in a Star Trek manner. It's got a lot of that same feel and flow that really kind of drew us to Next Generation. Now, 400 years in the future, technology has changed, so that's kind of the Star Trek stuff. But relationships, not so much. And that's where Seth MacFarlane really made this a great show, because he went and took that Star Trek model of like, how do you address issues that that trailblazers would run into with different planets, and some of the politics of what would be going on interplanetarily. That was all kind of built into this structure of sci-fi, and he's managing it, I think, in a fairly well manner. There's a lot of things in there that are like, really? That's totally wrong. But we typically give a benefit of the doubt on sci-fi, and especially because it's Seth MacFarlane, we're going to give it even a little bit more leeway, I think. But it's this relationships, not so much, that really is kind of where Seth MacFarlane throws in that humor, right? Because what he does with the show is not just go just straight-laced sci-fi. One of the best parts of Star Trek Next Generation was when they would have those little funny moments, right? And they would be very, very brief. It would be a look or a sneer by Captain Picard, or a look that Riker would give, and there were a lot of heartfelt moments too. I mean, I think everybody remembers the flute that Picard would play. I think that's just one of the most iconic episodes that's in Star Trek, and it plays to emotions, right? Seth does a good job of playing to those emotions, but everybody that is a character is very much more modern, like our day, right? Like, imagine taking a group of people in our world and setting them 400 years in the future. That's kind of what he did, and he uses that Seth MacFarlane humor in a lot of cases to just kind of find those moments of levity, but he does it way more than Star Trek Next Generation did, right? It's kind of, it's not the goal of the show, right? The goal of the show is not to make everybody laugh like it is in Family Guy or American Dad. The goal of the show is to deal with some of those same issues that Star Trek Next Generation would run into, and to create a captivating storyline, right? Create these characters that have genuine storylines, but as much as you can without overdoing it, throw in a lot more humor than probably Next Generation did. And it works so incredibly well. It really, really works well. And that's why 94% audience score. And this is the overall score for both seasons. Like, this is the overall view of the show. But there was a 94%, back here for season 1. Season 2, it's kind of funny because now all of a sudden, critics suddenly get it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a great show. 100%. Right? Like, what changed from season 1 to season 2? Not much. There was very, very little that changed as far as the way that the show went about what it does, right? The characters are the same, well, except for a couple of changes, but mostly the characters are the same. The storyline is still very good, although I think season 2 had a bit more character development to it. There's much more emphasis. In fact, one of the best episodes of season 2 was, in fact, the Isaac storyline, right? This android that's on the ship. Like, that was a total, like, they had been building up to this thing and nobody really knew it. It just kind of came out of nowhere. It felt like an exciting episode. You kind of had this one way that you thought things were going to go, and that subverting your expectations was done incredibly well that episode, in those 2 episodes. It was one of those things where you kind of expected this particular pathway for things, just because that's how typical sci-fi shows go, and they just went off in 180 degrees, but it was done very, very well, much differently, and handled very differently than how some of the other subverting your expectations has gone lately in other shows like Game of Thrones. Anyway, so season 2 is really good. Now, one of the things that started to happen, though, is while season 2 was going, they were delaying announcing a 3rd season. And a lot of us were like, what is the deal? Well, finally, yesterday, it did get announced that the Orville will return for a 3rd season. And that is the probably some of the best news I've heard in the last week. Really, really glad to have it. Fans can thank the state of California, which helped keep the show afloat. So there was a little bit of, and they go into, they barely kind of touch on it, but it was a hefty tax credit from the state of California made a third season a cheaper proposition. So I think I kind of find this ironic because most of you guys know my politics. I don't really like the idea of let's give tax breaks for certain things because I think that's relatively unfair. But at the same time, I do believe in fewer taxes, and California is one of the highest taxed states in the union. I can understand why, let's do a hefty tax credit. Okay, well, then we can go ahead and move forward with the show. And maybe that was just simply what they were waiting for before they could even say that there was going to be a third season. Now, this show, sci-fi shows in general, tend to be very expensive to produce, especially in today's world where you have a lot more CGI. You have a lot more graphics that are designed by computer developers or artists, right? Different rendering software. And that can take a long time to get everything just right. You got to have the right shaders. You got to have the right polygons. You got to do a lot of stuff. One of the things that they've done in order to kind of pull back a little bit, but also in an effort to kind of keep that same Star Trek feel is like the ship that they have, the ship model that they have is not CGI. It's an actual model that they have. It's a smaller model that you might have seen on Star Trek, and they use the same camera tricks and, green backgrounds and, we'll project some sort of image in the back of this green screen in order to kind of to reduce some of the cost there of some of the videography and cinematography that they have to do in order to make the show work. But there is still quite a bit of CGI that has to be done. And so it is a very expensive thing. And you got the costumes, right? The costumes, because everybody's an alien practically. You've got expensive costumes that have to be built. There's a lot that goes on there. So going back to Fox has renewed the Orville for a third season, which is just amazing. The second season was not a ratings winner, and viewing numbers dwindled as time went on. And I think the main reason was there was less emphasis in season 2 on the jokes and a bit more on character development, which for some of us was good. There were some troubles there in some of the episodes. Like they had 2 Bortus episodes in a row, and that kind of threw, I think, some people off. Like, it's not quite as good. But the show still, especially like midway, that Isaac stuff, the identity episodes was just probably one of the best episodes. I'm going to say this boldly. I think that episode was one of the best episodes ever on TV of any show. It was so well done, from the graphics that were on it to the storyline that was in there, the surprise twist that was involved in it, the way that the way that it was acted was absolutely phenomenal. And I mean, you're talking about Seth MacFarlane as the captain of this ship. You would think that there would be maybe some acting chops that weren't quite there. I don't know what his background is as far as in acting. I don't really know Seth's total career or anything like that, but I don't really imagine that he was this Juilliard of acting kind of person, right? I don't think that he went through a bunch of acting schools in order to become a professional actor. He's not classically trained, I guess is what I'm saying. And he doesn't come off as classically trained, but the way that he is the captain on this show is really, really good. And that episode, I mean, it really was the culmination of a season and a half of building up a character and building up a storyline, and then just flipping it on its ear in a wonderful way that really transformed the entire show. The whole dynamic of the show completely changed on one episode. That's what happened. Like, one episode completely flipped the script on everybody, the whole entire environment, the I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. I'm losing my word. Anyway, it was just a really great show, a great episode, and I highly recommend it. Season 2, go watch you got to watch it all the way up until Identity. There's a great battle scene in there, just phenomenal stuff. Okay. Yeah, so when it began, the Orville was essentially a dodgy cover version of Star Trek The Next Generation, but with more dick jokes. That's kind of the overall feel I think a lot of people had with it. At least going into the show. That was kind of what I think a lot of people thought it was, but I think that this is a mischaracterization of the first season. There was a lot more emphasis on, let's create, how can we do adventure stories? One of the other things that's really good about this show is that it's not necessarily always one episode after another that's kind of this neatly compressed storyline in one episode, right? So there's a lot of themes that bleed on into other episodes. And that's really well done. Again, is like we have this ongoing storyline, and there's several ongoing storylines that don't just kind of wrap up all nicely and tightly in a bow at the end of 60 minutes. You actually have these ongoing issues and conflicts that go on throughout not just seasons, but not just one season, but even roll over into the second season. Like the Bortus storyline is a really good example of that. Like there's still really not a resolution there. There's still a lot of conflict. And sometimes that conflict is the driver of the episode. Sometimes it's just kind of in the background, and you'll see it just kind of come into play every once in a while. And it just kind of, this episode could be about something else entirely, but whatever's going on with Bortus in his life kind of influences what's going on in this current episode, even though it's not the direct storyline. And that interplay of the relationships and the interplay of the personnel on it and the characters that are in there really is what makes the show shine. Because it's not just as simply, well, let's do 60 minutes of a nice, tightly wrapped episode where everything gets resolved in the end. And yeah, so really well done. So it's Star Trek, but a sense of fun. That is probably a really good summation of what the show is about. But I really do like what they say on the top of this, the Orville, this little clip here. 400 years in the future, technology has changed. Relationships, not so much. I think that's a good summation. Like it's take people in today's world, drop them 400 years from now, and make them starship captains and personnel on board a starship. Because are we really going to change? Are we really, in 400 years, are we really going to be that different relationship-wise? Maybe. It's not totally utopian, right? And that's kind of what I think Seth really taps into. Okay, so the last thing I have for you guys is this really funny gag reel of the Orville that I thought was definitely something we should watch. So here we go.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know we were rolling. We were just talking at it.
Oh, okay. Anything I need to know?
I just want to find his glasses, but we'll act.
Okay, you gonna act? Okay, they're gonna act now, guys.
Hey, Chad. Can you do one where you're not pantomiming fellatio? Thanks so much. Just want to go on record that was a business request that falls under the purview of my job. Okay, let's move on.
I also think that...
Yeah, like somehow keeps a shred of like...
What did Seth say?
That was the acting police.
Paula, get the door open. On it.
Get the other door, Tala.
Get the other door.
Thought you were done already and I started acting. Totally forgot what I was supposed to say.
You're out of line. No. I cut your line, Captain.
Oh my God, it is... Wait, what's my line?
I've never seen him make a mistake. Mark was coming back in with his helmet off. Bless you. Let's go again.
Understandable feeling. Oh my God.
That's my chair.
My ear.
approximately 1 nano. Fuck it, sorry. Who said that?
Fuck, we're gonna get fired.
Oh, shit.
Doc! I have to tell you about the future!
You want to continue, don't you?
I do, kind of.
All right. Good stuff there. Yeah. Those guys. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let's see what we got for the chat here. Kent says, this is what Star Trek should have been, almost as good as Firefly. Yeah. I think that it... Yeah. I think you're referring to Star Trek Discovery, right? Definitely, I think, and there's a lot of kind of back and forth between those two shows going on right now. Discovery is not really happy, I think, with the whole Orville thing going on, but the Orville does stay far enough away from the Star Trek world and kind of skirts that line well enough that they're not really interfering on copyright infringement, but it really kind of is. Like, it's that kind of show that just has that Star Trek feel more so than Discovery does. And it really, it's just a real enjoyable show. I think the actors have a lot of fun portraying their characters, get into character, and find the humorous moments. Seth just knows how to find that perfect moment for a nice little piece of humor in there. One of my favorite parts is like going back to that one Isaac episode, the Identity, where one of the pilots comes out and he's just just a walk in the park, Kazansky, like just throws out this Top Gun reference right in the middle of this battle scene, and it's just that kind of perfect little bit of scoped humor in the right moment that is just great for Seth MacFarlane. So my wife says, every time I think of this, I think of the captain of the Orville says we're not real. And that was great because it was a Family Guy episode where they kind of interplay with, why do you sound like the captain on Orville? When it's Brian. And then there's like, this is Brian talking. Well, this is Seth MacFarlane talking. This is the captain of the Orville talking. And it's all the same guy. It's all Seth MacFarlane. It's really funny episode for Family Guy. Kent says, critics actually watched season 2 instead of just assuming what they thought of sci-fi. Yeah, and I still think that there's some of them that didn't even really watch season 1, or they had this onset opinion, like we saw in the article, right? This article where he says, switch over to this real quick, right? So where he says, when it began, the Orville was essentially a dodgy cover version of Star Trek The Next Generation, but with more dick jokes. That's such a cover-up. That's not, just thinking about that's like, I had this original opinion of it before I even really watched the show, and I thought it was really negative, and I may have posted something about that somewhere, so since I said that, I kind of have to stick to it, even though it was totally wildly inaccurate, but I still need to have that opinion because that's what I stated it was, but now it's good. Now it's a good show, even though nothing has changed, right? Like, it's just amazing how these critics live in this really bizarre world where they don't, I'm sorry, but they've got about as much credential with me as, or I should say clout with me as like the news media in today's world. They just don't, they've got their skewed opinions, they live in their bubble, and they think that they just know what everybody wants, and that they're just going to be the best judges of what everybody should watch. That's just a bunch of bunk. And we can see Rotten Tomatoes. I'm surprised that Rotten Tomatoes hasn't like taken off a bunch of reviews or something to kind of knock down the show and get it closer to what the critics say, because they've done stuff like that. They've removed fans' reviews in the past in order to try to match a little bit better what the critics say, so that there isn't this wide disparity between what the critics have to say for a TV show or a movie. So Rotten Tomatoes is not exactly the best source, because they do like to remove things, especially if it's negative. They like to remove negative unless it's a critic negative. But if you have a voice at all, that's another area where they might silence you, and because they're a private entity, they might be able to do that. Okay, anyway, I'm not going to get too far into that, but I really am so glad to see the Orville season 3, seeing it come back. I'm kind of have mixed emotions, mixed feelings about the fact that the only reason it's coming back apparently is because California gave them a tax credit. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. But thank you so much for everybody for joining me today. I know it's a bit of a different one. We're talking about entertainment rather than, the typical stuff. But I'm really, that's kind of the point of this channel, is being able to talk about whatever I want. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I appreciate it. Hope to see you guys again tomorrow, same time, 7:30 every weekday. And I'll see you then. All right, bye-bye.